You'll never fly again. That's what the doctor told me. I had just lost my leg in a boating accident, and I was lying in a hospital bed, wondering if my life was over. But 2 years later, I became the first amputee to earn wings as a Naval Flight Officer. This is that story, and what it taught me about writing characters who refuse to quit. I was 26 years old. I just finished my first phase of flight school in Pensacola, Florida. I was awaiting orders to Jacksonville, Florida to complete my training on the P-3 Orion, the Navy's submarine hunting platform. I had it all figured out. Then I went out for a Friday excursion with some friends. We were in the intercoastal waterway. Beautiful day, not a care in the world. And then everything went sideways. I don't remember the actual moment of impact. I remember waking up in the water, looking down and seeing red. The propeller had caught my leg, severed it just below the knee. My friends pulled me out, and someone, I don't know who, had the presence of mind to apply a tourniquet. The EMT said that tourniquet saved my life. But lying in the hospital bed, a few days later, my life didn't feel very saved. The doctor came in. He explained the injury, the surgery, and the recovery timeline. He didn't have to say it. I knew what he and everyone else thought. I'd need to find a new career path. I told myself I couldn't do it. Just like that, door closed, dream over. The first few weeks were the hardest, not physically, though that sucked too, but mentally. I'd wake up and forget for a second, and then I'd remember, and I'd have to process it all over again. The phantom pain was brutal. Your brain keeps sending signals to the limb that isn't there, the nerves that are still inside your body that are wrapped around the wound. You feel an itch, you try to scratch your foot, it's gone, and then you'd feel the deep, aching reminder that something has changed. But here's what I didn't expect and nobody could have prepared me for. It's the looks. People would see me without a leg and immediately assume I was fragile, damaged, someone to be careful around. They'd lower their voices when they talked to me. They offered help I didn't need. I hated it. So I made a decision. I was going to prove them all wrong. I was going to prove myself wrong. Not the doctor who assumed I wouldn't fly, not the people who looked at me like I was broken. I was going to prove it to myself. My commanding officer was in my corner from the beginning. He says he doesn't remember this, but I clearly remember him telling me, "You're still going to fly," while I was headed in for surgery. Maybe my delirious brain made it up, but I believed it. My prosthetist told me it was possible, but it was going to take time. "You need to heal first," he said. "Until your wound closes, we can't fit your leg. You can't even think about flying until you start walking. You need to start getting stronger while you heal." So I worked. I started lifting weights and working on modified exercises from my physical therapist. But the wound wouldn't heal. So finally, they scheduled me to meet with a plastic surgeon. But the surgeon cautioned me, this won't be as good as a naturally healed wound. The skin won't be as forgiving against a prosthetic. You're going to have to take it easy on your leg. It's going to constantly tear. You're going to need to heal a lot, which means you're going to stay out of your leg. This wasn't an option for me. If I couldn't walk, I couldn't fly. But the wound wouldn't heal. So desperate, I booked the surgery. Maybe it wouldn't be as bad as the doctor said. But then something happened, the week of the surgery. I woke up and my wound had nearly closed. I rushed to the prosthetist to show him, and he agreed. It was closed enough to send me to Walter Reed to get me fitted for a prosthetic. Within a month, I was walking. But it wasn't easy. Some days I could barely walk, and other days I'd push through a full workout and feel like I'd accomplished something. Slowly, I got better, and one of the benefits of being in the Navy was that for our physical fitness test, I could swim instead of run. I was always a good swimmer, and losing a leg didn't slow me down. I kept up with my peers and I passed the fitness test, and I started researching what it would actually take for me to get a waiver for flight training. Turns out there was no precedent. No amputee had ever gone through naval flight training. That meant there was no policy saying that I couldn't, but also no policy saying that I could, which meant I had to make them create one. I worked with my flight doctor and training officers, and we submitted a waiver request to the medical board requesting clearance to fly. This came back surprisingly quick. Approved, but with a catch. Conditional on two things. I needed to pass the swim test, which included the underwater survival helo dunker, and I needed to be able to perform all the emergency procedures on my future aircraft without any limitations. So, it was up to me. Here's what I didn't understand then. That doctor wasn't wrong to doubt me. There was no precedent. No amputee had ever done this. But that's exactly what made it worth doing. When I wrote my protagonist, Jefferson Coburn, in Redacted, I gave him impossible odds. Not because I'm cruel, but because that's when the character reveals himself. When there's no guarantee, no roadmap, just the decision to try and keep going. So I kept pushing. First up was the swim qualification. I had to swim a mile in a flight suit, non-stop. I had to jump off a high dive and stay submerged and swim to a theoretical barrier as if I were staying underneath fire on top of the water. And I had to escape a crashed helicopter by holding my breath until I could swim out blindfolded. The mile wasn't hard, it was more uncomfortable because of the flight suit and having to wear my leg that felt like a lead weight. But I finished in the middle of the pack. The dive and the swim was also straightforward. I just had to get underneath and stay under the water for long enough until I could come up for air, and I did that fairly easy. The last one had me worried though. Escaping the helo dunker wasn't easy, and I was worried my leg would catch on a seat or the door, something that I couldn't even feel. And you had to make it out twice, first time with your eyes open, and the second time blindfolded. The machine dropped us in the water and flipped over. We were underwater and had to release our harness. I cleared the seats and pulled myself through the door, one down. The second time was going to be the real test. I was going to be blindfolded, no way to see if it would get stuck. Again, we dropped, we flipped. The water filled the cabin. I released my harness and started to move, deliberately but efficiently. I felt my way through the fuselage and finally, without feeling any pull from my leg, I felt the exit door and pulled myself up. When I took my first breath, it was a relief. One test down. Next up, the emergency procedures on the P-3. So I made it to my aircraft, the P-3 Orion. On day one, we had learned the emergency procedures. These were what I had to be able to perform without limitation to prove to the medical board that I could fly. There were 3 procedures I had to learn. What to do in case of a water landing, what to do in case we had to jump out and use a parachute, and what we had to do in case of fire on the ground. I made sure I knew my roles and had the procedures down pat. When the day came to prove it, I entered the P-3 inside the hangar. There was a film crew there to capture my attempt, but I didn't worry about them. I needed to remember my procedures. First up was the water landing. I performed my required radio calls, assumed the correct position, and then evacuated the correct door. I practiced it so many times it was easy. Next up was having to jump out of a plane, or really just get your parachute on and get to the right door. The only hard part about that was getting the parachute on, which was locating it behind my seat and then putting it on the ground and stepping through it to pull it up tight. I found it and I put it on the ground and I got my leg through and pulled it up. Once I had it secured, I made it to the evacuation door and assumed my position. And luckily, since it was just a drill, we didn't have to jump. That part of the test was over. Last up was the one I was most worried about. This was the drill in case there was a fire on the plane. It was also the most likely to happen. The first thing we'd have to do was try and fight the fire, and so we went through the procedures on how to do that. Everybody doing their correct jobs and making calls to the person commanding the fire control. But then we had to evacuate the airplane because that's part of the drill. So we had to make it to the correct evacuation hatch, which was over the wing. And I climbed out on the wing, and my stomach was doing butterflies because you had to scoot down to the edge of the wing, and then you jump 15 feet to the ground. And I was worried whether or not my leg was going to hold up, whether my body would hold up for that drop. As I approached the edge, the ground seemed to get further and further away. Finally, gravity took over, and I slid off the plane and landed on my feet. A jolt of electricity shot through me, not from the landing, but realizing that I had just completed the test, and my leg held. All the requirements for the waiver complete. I just needed to wait on the board's decision. The call came 2 weeks later. I was at my desk. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew. The voice at the other end of the phone said, "Lieutenant Junior Grade Stecker, your waiver has been approved." The ceremony was at Naval Air Station Jacksonville. My family from all over the country was there. When they pinned those wings on my uniform, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relieved. Because it meant I wasn't damaged goods. I was just different, and different was enough. That moment taught me something about writing characters with scars. The scar isn't the story. The refusal to let it define you, that's the story. In Redacted, Jeff Coburn has a tattoo that burns when he's stressed. It's a physical reminder of trauma. But the story isn't about trauma, it's what he does despite it. Your protagonist's wound isn't backstory, it's present tense. It shapes every choice they make, but it doesn't stop them. I flew P-3 Orions for years. I hunted submarines. I flew over combat zones. I did the job I was told I'd never do. And every single flight, I thought about that hospital room, about what that doctor said, about what I said to myself. That moment when I had to decide, believe that I couldn't do it or prove myself wrong. I refused to quit. That's what grit actually looks like. Not invincibility, just refusal.